In 1917, the Romanov dynasty collapsed after ruling Russia for over 300 years. What followed was one of the most radical and violent political upheavals in modern history. From the Winter Palace to the streets of Petrograd, the Russian Empire gave way to revolution, civil war, and the rise of a new ideology, communism. In this episode of History in Under 15 Minutes, we unravel the fall of the Tsar and the rise of Lenin's Bolsheviks, who forever changed the course of the 20th century. A crumbling empire. At the dawn of the 20th century, Russia was a vast empire stretching from Eastern Europe to the Pacific. Ruled by the autocratic Romanov dynasty, the empire was rich in culture and resources, but socially fragile and politically archaic. While much of Western Europe had embraced industrialization and political reform, Russia remained stuck in the past. A feudal-like society with an oppressed peasantry and a ruling aristocracy that clung to absolute power. Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia, ascended the throne in 1894. He was a deeply religious man, devoted to his family, but lacked the vision and decisiveness needed to govern a modernizing empire. He believed his authority was divinely ordained, and he resisted reforms that might have saved his dynasty. Russia's population was growing, but so was its poverty. Cities were swelling with industrial workers, but wages were low and conditions harsh. Discontent simmered beneath the surface. In 1905, after a humiliating defeat in the Russo-Japanese War, protests erupted across the empire. The most infamous was Bloody Sunday, when imperial guards opened fire on peaceful demonstrators in St. Petersburg. The revolution that followed was ultimately suppressed, but it forced Nicholas to make concessions, like the creation of the Duma, a legislative body. Yet these reforms were half-hearted. Real power remained in the Tsar's hands. The seeds of revolution had been planted. War and weakness. The outbreak of World War I in 1914 pushed Russia to the brink. Initially, patriotic fervor united the country, but enthusiasm quickly faded as military defeats mounted. Russian soldiers were poorly equipped, poorly led, and often sent to the front without rifles. Over 1.7 million soldiers would die in the war, and millions more were wounded or taken prisoner. Food shortages became severe. Cities lacked basic services. Inflation skyrocketed. Public trust in the government collapsed. Nicholas made a fatal decision in 1915. He took personal command of the Russian army. This backfired catastrophically. With the Tsar now directly associated with military failures, his political credibility evaporated. Meanwhile, back in Petrograd, formerly St. Petersburg, his German-born wife Alexandra was left in charge of domestic affairs and heavily influenced by the mystic Rasputin. Rasputin's influence and rumored corruption deepened public disgust. The monarchy appeared completely out of touch. By the winter of 1916, Russia was teetering. Hunger, cold, and disillusionment gripped the nation. Workers and soldiers were radicalizing. Revolution was no longer a question of if, only when. February Revolution. The fall of the Tsar. In March 1917, February by the Julian calendar still used in Russia, spontaneous strikes and protests erupted in Petrograd. Initially sparked by food shortages and high bread prices, the demonstrations quickly spread to include factory workers, soldiers, and ordinary citizens demanding political change. For days, the Tsar's troops tried to suppress the protests. But then, something unprecedented happened. The soldiers mutinied. Many joined the crowds, chanting for an end to war and the monarchy. With no one left to defend him, Nicholas II abdicated the throne on March 15, 1917. 3 centuries of Romanov rule ended in a single, chaotic week. A provisional government was formed, led by liberal reformers like Alexander Kerensky. They promised democracy, civil rights, and a new Russia. But they made one critical mistake. They kept Russia in the war. Even as the Tsar was removed, the suffering continued. The people wanted peace. The army was demoralized. The cities were still starving. The stage was set for a second revolution, one that would not just reform Russia, but remake it entirely. Lenin returns, the Bolsheviks to rise. In April 1917, an exiled revolutionary named Vladimir Lenin returned to Petrograd. Smuggled in by German agents hoping to destabilize Russia, Lenin had spent years developing a radical socialist vision. Unlike the Provisional Government, Lenin didn't want gradual reform. He wanted total transformation. In his famous April Theses, he demanded peace, land, and bread. 3 words that captured the hopes of millions. Lenin's party, the Bolsheviks, were a minority among socialists, but they were well-organized, disciplined, and ideological. They infiltrated workers' councils called Soviets, which held real power on the streets. As the Provisional Government floundered, the Bolsheviks gained momentum. Their message was clear: end the war, redistribute land to peasants, and hand power to the Soviets. By the summer of 1917, tensions boiled. Armed demonstrations erupted, and though the Bolsheviks were briefly suppressed, the government's inability to restore order only made Lenin's promises more appealing. When General Kornilov attempted a right-wing coup, Kerensky had to arm the Bolsheviks to defend Petrograd, ironically giving them the means to seize power themselves. October Revolution. Lenin seizes power. On the night of October 25, 1917, November 7th in the modern calendar, the Bolsheviks launched a carefully planned uprising. Red Guards seized key locations in Petrograd: bridges, telegraph stations, railroads, and military barracks. By morning, they had taken the Winter Palace with little resistance. The Provisional Government was arrested. Russia belonged to the revolution. Lenin emerged from hiding and declared a new government, a dictatorship of the proletariat led by the Soviets. The world watched in shock. A radical Marxist regime now controlled the largest country on earth. Lenin immediately moved to deliver on his promises. He called for peace negotiations with Germany, began nationalizing land and factories, and dismantled the old institutions of imperial rule. The Russian Revolution had succeeded, but this was only the beginning. Civil war and Red Terror. Not everyone accepted Bolshevik rule. Within months, civil war erupted between the Reds, Bolsheviks, and the Whites, a coalition of monarchists, liberals, and foreign-backed forces. The war was brutal. Villages were burned. Executions became routine. The Bolsheviks unleashed the Red Terror, using secret police, Cheka, to eliminate enemies, real or imagined. The Romanovs, Nicholas II and his family, were executed in 1918 to prevent any chance of restoration. Despite massive foreign intervention, the Bolsheviks emerged victorious by 1922. Lenin's new regime established the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR, the world's first communist state. A new world order had begun, built not on monarchy or capitalism, but on Marxist ideology and authoritarian control. Legacy: a new world. The Russian Revolution did more than topple a monarchy. It shattered the centuries-old social and political order and introduced a new ideology that would define global politics for much of the 20th century. It was the first time in history that a working-class revolution successfully overthrew a powerful imperial regime and sought to build a state based entirely on socialist principles. The success of Lenin and the Bolsheviks inspired revolutionary movements around the world. From China to Vietnam, Cuba to Africa, Marxist-Leninist ideology became a blueprint for resistance, revolution, and, in some cases, authoritarianism. The Russian Revolution laid the foundation for the Cold War, dividing the world into two competing spheres, capitalist West and communist East. The creation of the USSR sent shockwaves through monarchies, colonial powers, and democracies alike. Suddenly, the idea that workers could rise, seize power, and reshape society was no longer theoretical. It was reality. Yet the revolution came with a devastating human cost. The Civil War left millions dead, and the Red Terror crushed dissent. Promises of liberty gave way to rigid control, censorship, and surveillance. Lenin's revolutionary ideals would be expanded and ultimately distorted by his successors. Joseph Stalin, in particular, would turn the young Soviet state into a totalitarian machine where fear ruled and dissent meant death. Still, for many across the globe, especially the colonized, the exploited, and the disenfranchised, the Russian Revolution remained a symbol of possibility. It proved that history could be rewritten and that empires could fall. Whether as a cautionary tale or a beacon of hope, the revolution's legacy continues to echo into our modern world. Cliffhanger: Lenin's legacy. By the time Lenin died in January 1924, he had reshaped the world's largest empire into a revolutionary superpower. In just a few short years, he had dismantled centuries of monarchy, defeated a civil war, and established the first communist state in history. But his final years were marked by illness, isolation, and growing doubts about the future of his revolution. In his writings, he warned of the dangers of centralized power and expressed concern about a rising figure in the party, Joseph Stalin. With Lenin's death, the question loomed: who would inherit the revolution? The battle for succession would unleash a new era of political brutality, betrayals, and ideological extremes. In Part 2, we'll uncover how Stalin outmaneuvered his rivals, consolidated total control, and transformed Lenin's dream of equality into a regime of fear and oppression. The Red Star would rise, but at what cost? Subscribe now to follow the next chapter in the Soviet story. The revolution was only the beginning.